Montana Territory, 1878. Snow beat against the weathered walls of the small cabin like angry fists demanding entry. Inside, 22-year-old Ruth Lawson stared at the precious reserves of firewood dwindling faster than her hope. The bitter December cold seemed determined to claim everything she loved, just as it had almost claimed her husband 2 winters prior. Ruth believed one truth above all others. The Montana frontier existed to break women, especially those foolish enough to come west with dreams in their eyes and love in their hearts. She had learned this lesson the hard way when influenza had stolen her Daniel, leaving her alone with their 2 young children in this unforgiving wilderness. "Mama, I am hungry," 6-year-old Sarah whispered, her small hand tugging at Ruth's faded blue calico dress. Ruth stroked her daughter's wheat blonde hair, so like her own. "I know, darling. We will eat soon." She glanced at 4-year-old Thomas, huddled beneath a quilt by the fire, his dark eyes, Daniel's eyes, watching her with quiet trust that she could not bear to disappoint. What Ruth wanted was simple: to get through another winter, to keep her children fed, to survive one more season in this harsh land before perhaps admitting defeat and returning east to her disapproving family who had warned her against marrying a dreamer with Western ambitions. What she needed: connection, partnership, someone to share the crushing weight of frontier life, seemed an impossible luxury. The nearest town was 10 miles away, and Ruth had convinced herself that loneliness was simply the price of independence. The wind howled louder, and Ruth peered through frost-rimmed windows at the snowdrifts building like white mountains around her cabin. The blizzard had come earlier than expected, a wall of white fury descending from northern skies without warning. She silently counted the dwindling supplies in her pantry, enough for 2 weeks if they were careful. They would survive. They always did. Then she heard it, a sound that did not belong to the storm. A voice, perhaps, or the desperate whinny of a horse. "Thomas, Sarah, stay by the fire," Ruth commanded, wrapping her thickest shawl around her shoulders and taking the rifle from above the door. She cracked open the cabin door, and the wind nearly tore it from her grasp. Through the swirling white, Ruth spotted a dark shape moving slowly toward the cabin, a man leading a struggling horse through snow that reached past his knees. Man and beast seemed moments from collapse. The sight contradicted everything Ruth believed about frontier survival: that help would never come, that strangers meant danger, that the weak perished. Yet here was someone who might need her aid more than she needed her caution. "Over here," she called, her voice nearly lost in the howling gale. "This way to the cabin." The figure changed course, staggering toward her voice. As he drew nearer, Ruth could see he was young, probably no older than 25, his face nearly blue with cold beneath a frost-covered hat. His horse, a handsome bay gelding, trembled violently. "Ma'am," the man managed through chattering teeth, "I got caught. Storm came too fast." Ruth made her decision. "The stable is around back. Follow me with your horse." She led him to the small lean-to where her own mare stood, and together they brought his exhausted mount inside. The stranger's hands were so numb he could barely remove the saddle. "You will lose your fingers if you do not get warm," Ruth said, taking over the task. "Go inside. My children will show you to the fire." Once the horses were settled, Ruth returned to find the stranger crouched before her hearth, his frozen hands extended toward the flames while Sarah and Thomas watched with undisguised fascination. Up close, she could see he was handsome in a rugged way, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of summer sky. His clothes marked him as a cowhand: sturdy denim, worn boots, and a sheepskin jacket now dripping onto her floor. "I am deeply grateful, ma'am," he said, turning those blue eyes toward her. "Name's Lucas Hayes. I work at the Double Bar Ranch about 15 miles southwest. Was bringing supplies back when the storm hit." "Ruth Lawson," she replied, hanging his wet coat by the fire. "These are my children, Sarah and Thomas." "You saved me, Mrs. Lawson. I was starting to think I might not make it." "It was Sarah who heard you," Ruth admitted. "She has sharp ears." The little girl beamed at the praise. "I heard his horse crying in the snow, Mama." Lucas smiled at the child. "Then I owe you my life, Miss Sarah." Ruth busied herself preparing a simple stew, adding extra water to stretch the portions. As she worked, she found herself watching Lucas interact with her children. Unlike most men she had encountered since Daniel's death, who treated her offspring as unfortunate complications. Lucas seemed genuinely charmed by them. He answered Thomas's eager questions about his horse and complimented Sarah's small rag doll with the seriousness one might reserve for fine art. "Have you been alone long?" Lucas asked quietly when the children had turned their attention elsewhere. 2 years this February," Ruth replied, stirring the pot more vigorously than necessary. "My husband caught influenza. The doctor from town came too late." Lucas nodded. "The frontier takes its toll. I lost my parents to fever when I was 16. Been making my own way since." Something in his voice, not pity, but understanding, made Ruth look up. His eyes held none of the calculation she had grown accustomed to seeing in men who discovered she was a widow with land. "The storm will not let up before morning," she said, changing the subject. "You are welcome to sleep by the fire." For 3 days, the blizzard raged, trapping them in the small cabin. Under normal circumstances, Ruth would have been terrified to shelter a strange man. But necessity forced trust, and Lucas proved himself useful rather than threatening. He chopped what little wood remained in her indoor stack, told wonderful stories that made her children laugh, and respected the invisible boundaries Ruth placed around herself. On the second night, after the children were asleep, Lucas confessed, "I always figured a man out here had to stand alone. That depending on others was weakness." Ruth nodded. "I believe the same. That the frontier is no place for connection, only survival." "And now?" he asked softly. Ruth considered the question, watching the firelight play across his features. "Now I am not certain. Sometimes survival and connection seem like the same thing." By the 3rd day, when the storm finally broke, revealing a world transformed into sparkling white, Ruth found herself reluctant to see him go. Lucas had carved small wooden animals for the children and repaired a leaking corner of her roof. More than that, he had brought laughter and warmth into a home that had known too little of either. "I cannot repay your kindness properly," Lucas said as he prepared to leave, "but I will try. Expect me back with supplies before the week is out." Ruth shook her head. "You owe us nothing, Mr. Hayes." "Lucas," he corrected gently, "and it is not about owing. It is about wanting to help." His eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. "Besides, I promised Thomas the First would show him how to properly groom a horse." True to his word, Lucas returned 5 days later with a sledge loaded with firewood, flour, sugar, and other provisions. Ruth protested, but he was adamant. "The ranch owner was grateful I survived. These are from him. A thank you for saving his best cattle driver." His grin suggested this might be an exaggeration, but Ruth accepted the gifts with reluctant grace. These visits continued throughout the winter. Lucas would arrive every week or so, sometimes bearing small gifts, candy for the children, coffee for Ruth, and always staying to help with repairs or chores before returning to the ranch. The children began watching for him eagerly, and Ruth found herself doing the same, though she tried to hide it. On a clear February day, Lucas arrived with news. "The Double Bar is sending a herd to Bozeman come spring. I will be gone for most of the summer." Ruth felt a hollowness open inside her chest, but simply nodded. "The children will miss you." "Only the children?" he asked, his voice teasing but his eyes serious. "It will be quieter without your visits," she admitted, unable to say more. Lucas stepped closer. "Ruth, I have been thinking. Your land here is good, but working it alone with 2 small children is near impossible. You need help." Her spine stiffened. "We manage." "I know you do. You are the strongest woman I have ever met." He took a breath. "But what if you did not have to do it alone?" Ruth turned away, busying herself with mending. "If you are suggesting I hire help, you know I cannot afford it." "I am not suggesting hired help." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Ruth had come to recognize as nervousness. "I am suggesting a partnership." Before Ruth could respond, a commotion erupted outside. She rushed to the door to find Sarah screaming, pointing at Thomas, who had climbed dangerously high into the old oak tree near the cabin. "I can see all the way to town," the boy shouted, swaying precariously on a branch never meant to hold even his slight weight. Lucas was already running. "Stay still, Thomas. Do not move." The branch cracked just as Lucas reached the tree. Ruth's heart stopped as her son plummeted, but Lucas positioned himself perfectly, catching Thomas and rolling to absorb the impact. They landed in a heap in the snow. For one terrible moment, neither moved. Then Thomas started crying, and Lucas sat up, cradling the boy against his chest. "Are you hurt?" Ruth demanded, falling to her knees beside them. "He is fine," Lucas assured her, checking Thomas over. "Just scared, I think. Right, partner?" Thomas nodded through his tears. "I was flying, Mama. Then Mr. Lucas caught me." That night, after the children were asleep, Ruth found Lucas still at the kitchen table, whittling a small piece of wood. "You should stay the night," she said. "It is too dark to ride back safely." Lucas nodded, his hands continuing their careful work. "Ruth, about what I was saying earlier. You do not need to explain." She sat across from him. "Lucas, I cannot accept charity, even from you. This is not charity." He set down his knife. "Since that blizzard, I have thought about you. All of you, every day. These visits started as gratitude, but they have become the moments I live for." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I am not offering charity. I am offering my heart." Ruth felt her own heart quicken. The frontier breaks such offerings. Or perhaps it forges them stronger. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. "I have saved almost enough for my own spread. With your land and my savings, we could build something real here. And when you tire of raising another man's children?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Lucas's expression grew serious. "Thomas and Sarah stopped being another man's children to me the moment they helped save my life. They are remarkable, Ruth, just like their mother." Spring arrived with new challenges. As promised, Lucas left with the cattle drive, but not before asking Ruth to consider his proposal. She had given no answer, too afraid of what acceptance might mean, of opening herself to loss once more. The weeks of his absence stretched like years. Ruth found herself watching the horizon, hoping for a glimpse of his familiar figure. The children asked for him daily, and each time she had to explain that Mr. Lucas was working far away, her resolve weakened. When disaster struck, it came without warning. A late spring storm flooded the creek that bordered Ruth's property, washing away part of her carefully planted field and drowning 2 precious chickens. Worse, the rising water threatened the cabin itself. As Ruth frantically worked to divert the water with makeshift barriers, 8-year-old Jacob Winters, son of her nearest neighbor, appeared on horseback. "Pa sent me to help, Mrs. Lawson," he said, sliding from his mount. "He says to tell you he would come himself, but Mrs. Winters is having her baby." Ruth could have wept with gratitude. With Jacob's help, they managed to save the cabin, though the garden was a loss. When the waters receded, Ruth surveyed the damage with a heavy heart. Without that garden, the coming winter would be lean indeed. "Mrs. Lawson," Jacob said as he prepared to leave, "Pa also said to tell you that Mr. Hayes has been asking after you in his letters. Pa's been writing him at the cattle stops." "Mr. Hayes has been writing about us?" Ruth asked, surprised. Jacob nodded. "Pa says Mr. Hayes is sweet on you something fierce. Everyone knows it." The boy blushed. "Sorry, ma'am. Pa would tan my hide for saying that." After Jacob left, Ruth sat on her porch step, watching her children play in the mud left by the flood. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future with Lucas, his laughter filling their home, his strength beside hers, his gentle way with her children becoming a constant rather than a temporary blessing. What if her belief that the frontier demanded solitude was wrong? What if connection was not weakness but strength? Summer faded into autumn with no word from Lucas. The cattle drive should have ended weeks ago. Ruth told herself his silence meant he had changed his mind, realized the folly of taking on a widow and her children. She buried her disappointment in work, harvesting what little had survived the flood and preparing for another winter alone. Then came the rumors. A traveler passing through mentioned a cattle drive that had encountered trouble, rustlers near Bozeman, shots fired, men wounded. The traveler did not know names, but Ruth's nightmares filled in the blanks. Each day, she scanned the horizon, hoping and dreading in equal measure. October brought the first snow flurries and a letter delivered by the monthly mail rider. Ruth recognized Lucas's handwriting immediately and retreated to the privacy of her bedroom before breaking the seal with trembling fingers. The letter explained everything. The cattle drive had indeed encountered rustlers. Lucas had been shot defending the herd, not fatally, but seriously enough to require weeks of recovery in Bozeman. He was healed now and would return to the double bar within days. The letter ended with a question. Did she still welcome his visits? Ruth wrote back immediately, yes. Always yes. When Lucas finally appeared on the road leading to her cabin, Ruth almost did not recognize him. He was thinner, his face more weathered, and he rode with a slight stiffness that spoke of his injury. But his smile when he saw her waiting was unchanged. "You came back," she said simply when he dismounted. "I promised I would." Lucas reached into his saddlebag. "I brought something for you." He withdrew a small wooden box. "I have been carrying this since June." Inside the box lay a simple silver ring set with a single pearl. Ruth stared at it, unable to speak. "I almost died out there," Lucas said quietly, "and all I could think about was that I might never see you or the children again. Never get to tell you that I love you." "Lucas, please let me finish." He took her hand. "Ruth Lawson, I know you believe the frontier is too harsh for happiness, but I think perhaps that is exactly why we need each other. Not just to survive, but to truly live." The front door burst open, and Sarah and Thomas tumbled out, shrieking with delight at the sight of Lucas. He caught them both in a fierce hug, his eyes never leaving Ruth's face. That night, after the children's excited chatter had given way to sleep, Ruth and Lucas sat before the fire, the ring box open between them. "The double bar offered me a foreman position," Lucas said, "but I turned it down. I found a place of my own, a small ranch about 5 miles from here. Good water, decent grazing." "You bought land?" Ruth asked. Lucas nodded. "It is not much yet. Just a simple cabin and some fenced pasture. But it could be something fine with work." He paused. "Or I could sell it and put the money toward improving this place, if you prefer to stay here." Ruth stared into the flames, feeling the weight of the decision before her. "The children need stability. They have already lost so much." "I agree," Lucas said carefully, "which is why I would never ask you to leave this place if it holds your heart. But Ruth, home is not just a place. It is people. It is feeling safe and loved and understood." She looked up at him, this man who had stumbled into her life during a blizzard and somehow become essential to her happiness. "I was so certain that loving someone on the frontier only meant more pain when they were taken away." "And now?" he asked, echoing their conversation from that snowbound night months ago. "Now I think perhaps love is the only thing that makes the frontier bearable." Ruth reached for the ring box. "Yes, Lucas. Yes to your proposal. Yes to building a life together." The following spring, Ruth Lawson became Ruth Hayes in a simple ceremony attended by neighboring families. Lucas had spent the winter dividing his time between his own small ranch and Ruth's cabin, making improvements to both properties. They decided to make their home on Ruth's land, with Lucas's property providing additional grazing for their growing herd. On their wedding night, after the children were asleep, Lucas led Ruth to the porch and pointed to the distant hills, silver in the moonlight. "When I was lost in that blizzard," he said, "I had given up. I thought the storm would be the end of me. Then I heard Sarah's voice calling through the snow, and I knew I had found something I never thought possible out here, a home." Ruth leaned against his shoulder. "We saved each other, I think." "We did," Lucas agreed, his arm tightening around her. "And we will continue to do so, every day, through whatever storms come our way." As they stood together looking out over their land, Ruth reflected on how completely her understanding of frontier life had changed. The Montana Territory was still harsh, still demanding, but she no longer faced it alone, no longer believed that isolation was the price of survival. Instead, she had discovered that love, family, was not a vulnerability but a shelter against the wilderness. And in the years that followed, as their family and their ranch prospered, Ruth and Lucas Hayes became living proof that even in the wildest places, hearts could find their way home.